The battlefield was eerily silent now, a stark contrast to the chaos that had raged just hours before. The air still carried the metallic tang of blood and smoke, but the deafening roar of explosions and gunfire had been replaced by an unsettling quiet. Scattered remnants of war lay everywhere: shattered tanks, twisted metal, abandoned weapons, and scraps of uniforms torn apart in the heat of battle. The once green fields were scorched black, as if the earth itself bore scars from the conflict. Among the wreckage stood one figure who seemed out of place. A lone soldier, his uniform dirted and torn, leaned heavily against what remained of a crumbling wall. His helmet hung loosely from his hand, revealing sweat-drenched hair plastered to his forehead. His eyes darted around cautiously, scanning for any signs of movement or danger. Every breath he took felt labored, each inhale burning his lungs like fire. He knew better than to let his guard down. Even after the ceasefire, old habits died hard. What struck him most, though, wasn't the devastation surrounding him, it was the absence of life. Where there had once been thousands of soldiers shouting orders, firing weapons, and scrambling for cover, there was now nothing but emptiness. It was as though everyone else had vanished into thin air. No voices called out, no boots crunched on gravel, no distant hum of machinery broke through the silence. Just him and the ruins left behind. He tried not to think too deeply about it. After all, wars ended in strange ways sometimes. People retreated, regrouped, or simply fled when they couldn't bear the weight of destruction anymore. But something about this particular scene unsettled him more than usual. There was no retreat horn blown, no official declaration over radio signaling withdrawal. Everyone, his comrades, his enemies, had simply disappeared without explanation. And yet, here he was, standing amidst the desolation, unable to shake the feeling that he was being watched. His instincts screamed at him to move, to find shelter, to do something. But instead he froze, rooted to the spot. Something, or someone, was nearby. He could feel it in the way the hairs on the back of his neck prickled, in the way his pulse quickened despite the exhaustion weighing down his body. Slowly, deliberately, he turned his head toward the source of the sensation. And then he saw her. At first glance, she didn't seem real. She stood perfectly still, almost blending into the background of devastation with her pale skin and flowing garments that shimmered faintly under the dim light. Her presence was otherworldly, as though she belonged to another realm entirely. Yet, there was no mistaking the fact that she was alive, and looking directly at him. Her features were delicate yet striking, with high cheekbones and wide luminous eyes that glowed softly, like twin moons suspended in the night sky. Her hair cascaded down her back in waves of silver white, catching the faint breeze that stirred the ashes around them. She wore an intricate robe made of material unlike anything he'd ever seen, fabric that seemed to shift colors depending on how the light hit it, giving her an ethereal appearance. But it wasn't just her appearance that held him captive, it was her expression. She smiled at him, a serene and enigmatic curve of her lips that radiated calmness, as though she hadn't just witnessed the horrors of war but rather something profoundly beautiful. Her gaze locked onto his, unwavering and intense, as though she were peering straight into the depths of his soul. For a moment, time seemed to stop. The soldier's mind raced, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. Was she some kind of hallucination brought on by fatigue? Or perhaps a survivor, someone who had been caught in the crossfire and somehow managed to remain untouched by the carnage? But deep down, he knew neither explanation fit. This woman, this creature, wasn't human. And yet, she exuded a warmth, a quiet strength that made fear impossible. She tilted her head slightly, studying him with curiosity, her smile never faltering. Without saying a word, she communicated something far deeper than language, a connection that transcended words. For reasons he couldn't explain, he found himself taking a hesitant step forward, drawn to her like a moth to flame. As he moved closer, the world around them faded into insignificance. The wreckage, the smoke, the oppressive silence, all of it seemed to melt away, leaving only the two of them standing in a bubble of surreal stillness. He wanted to speak, to ask who she was or why she was here, but the words lodged in his throat. Instead, he could only stare back, captivated by the mystery before him. The soldier's legs felt like lead, yet they carried him forward, one heavy step at a time. Each movement was deliberate, cautious, as if he feared breaking some invisible spell. His heart pounded in his chest, not from fear, but from an unexplainable pull towards the alien princess. Her eyes, those glowing orbs that seemed to hold galaxies within them, never wavered from his face. It was as if she could see every thought racing through his mind, every emotion flickering across his weary features. As he drew nearer, details became clearer, amplifying the surreal nature of her presence. The fabric of her robe shimmered with hues he couldn't name, colors that danced between shades of blue, green, and gold, shifting with each subtle movement she made. Tiny patterns etched into the material resembled constellations, their intricate designs pulsating faintly, as though alive. She didn't seem bothered by the debris-strewn ground beneath her feet, nor did she appear affected by the acrid smell of burnt earth and gunpowder lingering in the air. She stood there, pristine and untouched, as if the war had never touched her. Her smile remained unchanged, soft and inviting, yet filled with an unreadable depth. It was disarming, making him question whether she truly understood the gravity of where they were, or if she came from a place so vastly different that such concepts held no meaning. Despite her serene demeanor, there was an undeniable power emanating from her, a quiet authority that commanded respect without demanding it. He stopped a few paces away, unsure how to proceed. Words failed him completely now, drowned out by the overwhelming aura of this stranger. He opened his mouth once, twice, but nothing came out. Finally, he settled for meeting her gaze squarely, searching for answers in those luminous eyes. What he found there startled him. Recognition, compassion, and something else, something akin to longing. Without warning, she extended a slender hand towards him, palm facing up. The gesture was simple, yet it carried immense weight, as though she were offering him something far greater than mere physical contact. He hesitated, torn between instinctive caution and an inexplicable urge to trust her. Slowly, tentatively, he reached out, his rough, calloused fingers hovering inches above hers. Before their hands could meet, a sudden gust of wind swept through the battlefield, carrying with it fragments of memory, flashes of battles fought, lives lost, and promises broken. The images flickered across his mind like scenes from a movie reel, disjointed yet vivid. He stumbled back, momentarily overwhelmed, while she remained unfazed, her smile unwavering. When the wind subsided, leaving behind only silence once more, he realized something profound. She wasn't just observing him, she was connecting with him on a level beyond comprehension. In that instant, he felt seen, not as a soldier, not as a casualty of war, but as a person burdened by experiences too heavy to bear alone. Somehow, impossibly, she understood. The soldier stared at the alien princess, his mind swirling with questions he couldn't voice. Who was she? Why was she here? What did she want from him? Yet none of these queries mattered as much as the raw truth staring back at him. She was unlike anything he'd ever encountered. Her very existence defied logic, her presence both comforting and unnerving. Every fiber of his being told him to run, to put distance between himself and this unknown entity, but his feet refused to obey. Instead, he stood rooted to the spot, transfixed by her gaze. Her smile widened ever so slightly, as though sensing his inner turmoil. She took a small step forward, closing the gap between them until they were mere inches apart. Up close, her beauty was almost painful to behold. Her skin glowed faintly, casting a soft luminescence that seemed to repel the shadows clinging to the battlefield. Her eyes, those endless pools of light, held secrets he suspected no human could ever fully grasp. And yet, despite her alien nature, there was something undeniably familiar about her, a warmth that reached deep into his soul and wrapped around it like a comforting embrace. He felt exposed under her scrutiny, as though she could peel back layers of his identity with nothing more than a glance. Memories surfaced unbidden, flashes of childhood laughter, the faces of fallen comrades, moments of love and loss. Each image tore through him like a blade, sharp and unrelenting, forcing him to confront emotions he'd long buried beneath the armor of survival. Tears welled up in his eyes, blurring his vision, but he didn't look away. He couldn't. She held him captive not with force, but with understanding, an empathy so profound it felt almost sacred. Her hand lifted again, hovering near his face without touching him. He flinched instinctively, expecting coldness or invasion, but instead, he felt a gentle wave of energy wash over him. It wasn't physical contact, but it might as well have been. The sensation was electric, awakening parts of him he hadn't known were asleep. His chest tightened, and for a moment, he thought he might collapse under the weight of it all. But then, just as suddenly as it had come, the intensity subsided, leaving behind a strange sense of clarity. Through her silent communication, he began to understand fragments of her intent. She wasn't judging him, she was acknowledging him. Not as a soldier defined by violence, but as a living being shaped by experiences both beautiful and terrible. Her presence wasn't threatening, it was healing. He realized with a jolt that she saw value in him, even amidst the wreckage of war. That realization struck him harder than any bullet ever could. Still, doubt lingered at the edges of his consciousness. Was this real? Or was his exhausted mind conjuring illusions to cope with the aftermath of battle? Yet, even as skepticism whispered its warnings, he couldn't deny the authenticity of what he felt. She was here, undeniably present, and she wasn't leaving. Her smile softened further, becoming almost tender, as though she sensed his struggle and chose to offer patience rather than pressure. The wind picked up again, rustling the tattered remnants of uniforms and stirring clouds of ash into the air. The soldier blinked, momentarily breaking eye contact, and when he looked back, she was still there, unchanged, unyielding. Her focus never wavered, her attention fixed solely on him. For the first time since stepping onto this desolate field, he felt seen, not as a cog in the machine of war, but as an individual with a story worth telling. Whether he trusted her or not, whether he believed in her or not, one thing was certain. She was offering him something rare and precious. Connection. Understanding. Hope. The soldier struggled to reconcile the conflicting emotions raging inside him. On one hand, the alien princess radiated an aura of peace and acceptance that he desperately craved after years of relentless warfare. On the other hand, her very presence challenged everything he thought he knew about the universe, humanity, and himself. The logical part of his brain screamed at him to maintain distance, to analyze the situation objectively before acting. But logic felt distant, drowned out by the visceral pull she exerted on his soul. He took another cautious step backward, putting a little more space between them. It wasn't an act of rejection but rather self-preservation, a way to regain control over thoughts that threatened to spiral out of reach. Yet, even as he retreated, her gaze followed him without judgment, her smile remaining steady. She made no move to follow, nor did she attempt to bridge the gap he'd created. Instead, she simply waited, her posture open and patient, as if she understood his need for space. Despite his efforts to resist, her influence seeped into him like water finding cracks in stone. He could feel fragments of tension easing from his shoulders, knots of anxiety loosening in his chest. It wasn't magic, exactly. At least, not in the way humans typically imagined it, but something far subtler. A resonance, perhaps, between her essence and his own battered spirit. He hated how vulnerable it made him feel, how easily she seemed to bypass years of emotional armor built during combat. Vulnerability was dangerous, especially now, when survival depended on staying sharp and detached. And yet, he couldn't deny the relief that washed over him. For so long, he'd carried the weight of war alone, shouldering burdens meant for countless others. The deaths of friends, the destruction of cities, the endless cycle of violence. They had all piled onto his conscience until it felt like a mountain pressing down on him. Now, standing before this enigmatic figure, he felt some of that weight lift, however briefly. It terrified him. If she could unravel him so effortlessly, what else might she be capable of? His hands clenched into fists at his sides, knuckles white with tension. "Who are you?" The words burst out before he could stop them, harsh and abrupt in the otherwise silent expanse. His voice sounded foreign to his ears, rough and cracked from disuse. He half expected her to answer verbally, but she merely tilted her head again, her expression thoughtful. Her silence infuriated him, even as it intrigued him. Didn't she owe him some kind of explanation? Some reassurance that she wasn't another weapon sent to break him further? But deep down, he already knew the truth. She wasn't here to hurt him. Whatever her purpose, whatever her origin, her intentions didn't align with malice. That knowledge only deepened his confusion. If she wasn't an enemy, then what was she? An ally? A savior? Or something else entirely? The questions swirled faster, forming a maddening vortex in his mind. He wanted answers, clarity, anything to anchor himself in reality. But the longer he looked at her, the less certain he became about what reality even meant anymore. With a frustrated exhale, he turned away, pacing a few steps before stopping abruptly. His boots kicked up small clouds of ash, which drifted lazily in the stagnant air. He glanced back at her, half expecting her to vanish like a mirage. But she remained, steadfast and serene, as though carved from the same substance as the stars above. Against his will, his resolve began to waver. Maybe resistance wasn't the answer. Maybe surrender, just for a moment, was the only way to uncover the truth. The soldier's frustration simmered just below the surface, bubbling dangerously close to boiling over. He clenched his jaw tightly, grinding his teeth together as he wrestled with the whirlwind of emotions coursing through him. Her unwavering calm only fueled his agitation. How could she stand there so composed while his entire world teetered on the edge of collapse? He wanted to scream, to demand answers, to shake her until she revealed whatever secrets she was hiding. But instead, he remained frozen, trapped in a storm of indecision. Every instinct screamed at him to leave, to turn his back on this alien enigma and walk away. Survival had always been about cutting losses, about knowing when to retreat. Staying here, allowing himself to be drawn deeper into her orbit, felt reckless, like stepping off a cliff without knowing what lay below. Yet, even as the rational part of his mind urged him to flee, his body refused to comply. His legs stayed rooted to the spot, betraying his desire to escape. It was as if an invisible tether connected him to her, pulling him inexorably closer despite every ounce of resistance. "Why won't you say anything?" he growled, his voice low and strained. The words came out sharper than he intended, laced with anger and desperation. He hated how weak he sounded, how exposed. Soldiers weren't supposed to beg for answers. They were trained to find them on their own. But this was different. This wasn't a puzzle he could solve with strategy or brute force. This was something beyond comprehension, something that defied all logic. She didn't react to his outburst, her serene expression unchanging. If anything, her smile grew softer, more compassionate, as though she understood the turmoil raging inside him. That only infuriated him further. How dare she stand there, smiling like she had all the answers while he floundered in uncertainty? Who was she to judge him, to pity him, to see right through the walls he'd spent years building? His hands trembled at his sides, fists clenching and unclenching as he fought to keep control. He wanted to lash out, to strike something, anything, to release the pent-up rage threatening to consume him. But there was nothing to fight, no enemy to confront. Just her. And she wasn't fighting back. She wasn't even moving. "You don't belong here," he spat, the accusation ringing hollow in the empty battlefield. "You shouldn't be here. None of this makes sense." His voice rose with each word, cracking under the strain of suppressed emotions. "Everyone else is gone. Why are you still here? What do you want from me?" For the first time since he'd laid eyes on her, her smile faltered slightly. Not out of anger or offense, but something else, something that looked almost like sorrow. She lowered her hand slowly, letting it rest gently against her side. Then, with deliberate slowness, she took a single step forward. One step. That was all it took to shatter the fragile barrier he'd tried so hard to maintain. He stumbled backward, shaking his head violently. "No. Stay where you are." The command came out weaker than he'd hoped, tinged with panic. But she ignored it, taking another step closer. Her movements were graceful, unhurried, as though she had all the time in the world. Maybe she did. Maybe time meant nothing to her. "I can't," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I can't do this. I don't know what you are or what you want, but I can't handle this." His breathing quickened, shallow gasps escaping his lips as his vision blurred with unshed tears. He hated himself for showing weakness, for letting her see how much she unsettled him. But he couldn't stop it. The dam holding back years of pain and fear was cracking, and she was the fissure widening it further. Finally, she stopped, standing just a few feet away. Close enough to touch, yet still far enough to feel untouchable. Her glowing eyes searched his face, reading every line of anguish etched into his features. For a fleeting moment, he thought he saw something flicker in their depths, regret, maybe, or understanding. Whatever it was, it silenced him instantly, robbing him of words and leaving him hollow. "I'm sorry," she said softly, her voice barely audible over the wind. The sound hit him like a thunderclap, jolting him to his core. Her voice was unlike anything he had ever heard, melodic yet haunting, as if it carried the weight of countless worlds within its tone. It wasn't just the words that stunned him, it was the fact that she had spoken at all. Up until now, her silence had been a fortress, an impenetrable barrier between them. But now, with those two simple syllables, she had shattered it. "I'm sorry," she repeated, softer this time, her glowing eyes never leaving his. The apology seemed to hang in the air, heavy with meaning far beyond what the words themselves conveyed. She didn't explain who or what she was apologizing for, perhaps for everything. The war, the emptiness, the chaos surrounding them, or maybe even for her own existence. Whatever the reason, the sincerity in her voice struck him like a physical blow, forcing him to take another step back. He wanted to respond, to demand clarity or accuse her of manipulation, but no sound escaped his lips. Instead, he found himself staring at her, caught between disbelief and awe. Her ability to speak human language shouldn't have surprised him, not after everything else, but somehow, it did. Hearing her voice made her feel more real, more tangible, and yet infinitely more mysterious. It was as though she had crossed some invisible boundary, stepping closer to his world while still remaining firmly rooted in hers. The wind picked up again, swirling around them like a living thing, carrying with it fragments of memory and emotion. He could almost hear echoes of battle cries, screams of pain, and whispered prayers amidst the howling gusts. For a moment, he thought he saw shadows moving in the periphery, ghostly figures of soldiers long gone, their faces blurred but their presence palpable. He blinked hard, shaking his head to dispel the illusion, but when he looked back, she was still there, steady and unwavering. You can talk," he finally managed, his voice hoarse and uneven. It sounded ridiculous, even to his own ears, but it was the only coherent thought he could muster. She nodded slightly, her movements deliberate and measured. "Yes," she replied, her voice lilting with an accent he couldn't place. It wasn't foreign in the traditional sense, it was otherworldly, as though each word were crafted from stardust and delivered with care. "I can speak your language. I've learned much about your kind during my time here." "Your time here?" he echoed, his brow furrowing. His mind raced to piece together what she meant. Had she been observing humanity for years? Decades? Centuries? Was she some sort of cosmic witness to their history, silently watching as civilizations rose and fell? Or had she arrived recently, drawn by the carnage of this particular conflict? Before he could ask, she continued, her gaze softening further. "You fight so fiercely, yet you carry such sorrow. Your wars are born of fear and misunderstanding, fueled by divisions you create yourselves. And yet, despite it all, you cling to hope. That is why I stayed." His breath hitched at her words. They weren't accusatory or judgmental. They were observational, spoken with a detached curiosity that somehow made them sting even more. He felt exposed, stripped bare before her unflinching scrutiny. How could someone, or something, who clearly wasn't human understand the complexities of war better than those who waged it? "I don't," he began, his voice trailing off as doubt crept into his thoughts. He wanted to argue, to defend humanity against her quiet critique, but the arguments died on his tongue. What could he say? That war was necessary. That violence was justified when survival was at stake? Even as the excuses formed in his mind, they felt hollow, meaningless in the face of her piercing gaze. Instead, he settled for a simpler question. Why did everyone leave? The words tumbled out before he realized he'd spoken them aloud. It was a question that had gnawed at him since the moment he noticed the eerie absence of others. Where had they gone? Why had they abandoned him? And why had she chosen to stay? Her smile returned, faint but genuine. They left because they believed there was nothing left worth staying for. They sought refuge, answers, or perhaps oblivion. But you? She paused, tilting her head as though studying him anew. You remained. You stayed when the rest fled. That is why I stayed too. His chest tightened at her response. There was no accusation in her tone, no hint of reproach for those who had deserted the battlefield. Only understanding, and perhaps admiration. Admiration for him. The thought unsettled him deeply. He hadn't stayed out of bravery or conviction. He'd stayed because he hadn't known where else to go. Because exhaustion had rooted him to the spot. Because he'd been too broken to move. "I'm not special," he muttered, looking away. His boots scuffed against the ash-covered ground, kicking up small clouds that dissipated almost instantly. "I'm just stuck." Her laughter startled him, a light, melodic sound that seemed to dance on the wind. It wasn't mocking or cruel. It was warm, almost affectionate. "Stuck," she repeated, rolling the word over her tongue as though tasting it. "Is that what you believe? That you are trapped here, unable to move forward?" When he didn't answer, she took another step closer, closing the distance between them until mere inches separated them. This time, he didn't retreat. He couldn't. Something in her presence held him captive, rooting him to the spot despite his instincts screaming at him to run. "You are not stuck," she said softly, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "You are waiting." "Waiting for what?" he asked, his voice barely audible. He hated how vulnerable he sounded, how desperate. But he needed to know. Needed to understand. "For yourself," she replied simply, her glowing eyes searching his. "For the part of you that got lost in the fighting. The part that remembers why you started this journey in the first place." Her words struck a chord deep within him, resonating with a truth he hadn't dared to acknowledge. Somewhere along the way, he had forgotten who he was. Forgotten why he fought, why he endured, why he kept breathing when every fiber of his being screamed for release. He had become a machine, a tool of destruction, devoid of purpose beyond survival. And now, standing before this alien princess who saw straight through him, he realized just how hollow he had become. Tears welled up in his eyes, blurring his vision once more. He tried to blink them away, but they spilled over, tracing hot paths down his dirt-streaked cheeks. He didn't bother to wipe them away. What was the point? She already saw him for who he truly was, broken, fragile, human. Without warning, she reached out, her hand hovering inches from his face. He flinched instinctively, expecting rejection or judgment. But instead, her fingers brushed lightly against his cheek, wiping away one of the tears. The touch was feather-light, barely perceptible, yet it sent a shiver coursing through his body. It wasn't cold or alien. It was warm, comforting, like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. "You are not alone," she murmured, her voice filled with a tenderness that made his heart ache. "Even in the darkest moments, you are connected. To me, to others, to the universe itself. Do you feel it?" He didn't know how to respond. Did he feel it? He wanted to. Desperately. But the weight of everything he had seen and done pressed down on him, suffocating any glimmer of hope she offered. Still, her words lingered, planting seeds of possibility in the barren wasteland of his mind. As she withdrew her hand, the soldier felt a strange mixture of relief and loss. Relief because her touch had been overwhelming, too intimate for someone he barely knew. Loss because, for the briefest moment, he had felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. Connection. Not just to her, but to something greater, something vast and incomprehensible. The battlefield around them seemed to fade further into the background, the wreckage and ashes dissolving into insignificancy. All that remained was the two of them, locked in a silent exchange that transcended words. Her presence was magnetic, drawing him in despite his lingering doubts and fears. He wanted to trust her, to believe in the promise her words implied, that he wasn't alone, that there was still meaning to be found in the ruins of his life. But trusting meant letting go, surrendering the walls he had built to protect himself from pain. And then, as if sensing his hesitation, she spoke again. "Do not fear the unknown," she said, her voice steady and reassuring. "It is not your enemy. It is merely another path, another chapter waiting to unfold." Her words sparked something within him, a flicker of resolve, fragile but persistent. Perhaps she was right. Perhaps the unknown wasn't something to dread but rather something to embrace. After all, wasn't that what life was? A series of steps into the unfamiliar, each one shaping who you became? But even as the thought took root, questions swirled in his mind. Who was she, really? What did she want from him? And most importantly, where would this path lead if he chose to follow it? The soldier stood there, his heart pounding as the weight of her words settled over him like a comforting blanket. For so long, he had been consumed by fear. Fear of failure, of loss, of the endless cycle of violence that seemed to define his existence. But now, faced with this alien princess who radiated calm and understanding, he began to feel something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. Hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, there was a way forward. Her glowing eyes met his, filled with patience and compassion. You do not have to decide right now, she said softly, her voice carrying a melody that soothed his frayed nerves. But know this, I am here because I see potential in you. Potential for healing, for growth, for connection. You carry scars, yes, but those scars tell a story. They are proof that you have survived, that you are still standing when others might have fallen. Her words resonated deeply within him, striking a chord he hadn't realized existed. He thought about all the battles he'd fought, all the lives he'd touched and lost along the way. Each memory had left its mark, shaping him into the person he was today. And though the pain of those memories lingered, they also reminded him of his resilience, of his humanity. I don't know if I can trust you, he admitted, his voice trembling but honest. I don't even know if I can trust myself anymore. She smiled gently, her expression unwavering. Trust is not given lightly, and it should not be. But trust does not require certainty. It requires faith. Faith that even in the darkest moments, light will find its way through. As she spoke, something shifted inside him. The walls he had built around his heart began to crack, letting in slivers of warmth and possibility. He looked at her, not as an alien or an enigma, but as someone who saw value in him when he couldn't see it himself. Someone who believed in him when he no longer believed in anything. Slowly, hesitantly, he reached out his hand toward hers. She didn't move, allowing him to take the first step. When their fingers finally touched, a wave of energy surged between them, unlike anything he had ever experienced. It wasn't overwhelming or frightening, it was grounding, as if the universe itself was aligning to confirm that this moment mattered. You're not alone, she whispered, her smile widening. Never again. Tears streamed down his face, but this time, they weren't tears of despair. They were tears of release, of acceptance. For the first time in what felt like forever, he allowed himself to let go of the burdens he had carried for so long. The guilt, the anger, the grief, they didn't disappear entirely, but they became lighter, easier to bear. He felt free. And then, without warning, the battlefield around them began to change. The scorched earth softened, giving way to lush green grass dotted with wildflowers. The charred remains of tanks and weapons dissolved into shimmering particles of light, floating upward like fireflies before vanishing into the sky. Even the oppressive gray clouds parted, revealing a brilliant blue expanse adorned with wisps of white. He turned to her, astonished. What's happening? This is your world, remade, she explained, her voice brimming with pride. Not as it was, but as it could be. A reflection of what you choose to create moving forward. But how? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Because you chose to believe, she replied simply. In yourself. In me. In the possibility of something better. For a moment, he stood there in stunned silence, taking in the beauty surrounding them. It wasn't perfect. He could still see faint traces of the devastation that had once been, but it was alive. Vibrant. Full of promise. And for the first time in years, he felt hopeful about the future. What happens now? He asked, turning back to her. She tilted her head, her luminous eyes sparkling with mischief. That is up to you. I cannot stay forever, but I will guide you as long as you need. Together we can rebuild, not just this place, but your spirit. Your purpose. He nodded, feeling a sense of clarity wash over him. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he knew he wouldn't face them alone. Not anymore. Thank you, he said, his voice steady and sincere. For staying. For seeing me. Her smile grew brighter, filling the air with warmth. Always. With that, she extended her other hand, inviting him to walk alongside her. Without hesitation, he took it, feeling a surge of determination course through him. Together, they stepped forward into the renewed landscape, ready to forge a new path, one filled with hope, healing, and infinite possibilities. As they walked, the sun rose higher in the sky, casting golden rays across the land. The soldier glanced at her, marveling at the serenity she exuded. For the first time in years, he felt truly alive. Truly human. And as the horizon stretched endlessly before them, he realized that this wasn't the end of his journey, it was only the beginning.